Hey, Through Crosses family, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Pastor AJ. I oversee life groups and discipleship, and today we are continuing our series about sharing the hope that's within you. Today we'll be in Acts chapter 17, so if you have a Bible at home following along, feel free to flip open to Acts chapter 17. But before we get into the conversation, we want to let you know what's going on here at Three Crosses. And so we'd love for you to fill out our podcast survey. You can visit threecrosses.church/podcast. Tell us where you're from, who you are, where you're listening from, and we'd love to put a free drink from Neighborhood Coffee in your hands. At the same time, we would love to let you know about Serve Day. And so you can learn more information at threecrosses.church/Serve Day. It's a chance to get off the hill, make connections with our community, and serve all over the place around the East Bay. And so if you're interested in signing up as a group or signing up as an individual, check out threecrosses.church/Serve Day. All right, we have an awesome conversation about Acts chapter 17. And so with that, let's go deeper. Joining us back in the studio, Pastor Danny, sharing the hope that's within you. What a series this has been.
This has been great. I'm excited to get to this. We've been waiting to get to this passage the whole time, so I'm excited to be here.
So if you've been following along with this series, you're probably thinking, man, we haven't really opened our mouths all that much except for asking questions. We haven't really hit on what the gospel message is. So this is an exciting one. Acts chapter 17, a very famous passage where Paul is in Athens. And so we'll set the scene here by jumping in. We got a lot of verses. I know in your message you started in verse 22. So we're going to jump back all the way to verse 16 and set the scene here. Because it says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day with those who happened to be there. And so right off the bat, we see that Paul is in Athens. He's on his second missionary journey. He just got back from Berea, where some people received him well, other people chased him out of the city, and he left Silas and Timothy in that city while he went down the Aegean Sea to this really famous city named Athens. A whole bunch of cultural influence, philosophies there. The Greek-speaking language is there, emerging in the Roman Empire right there. People oftentimes visited Athens. And so one of the questions I had in terms of setting the scene, I feel like these two verses really encapsulate where we've been in this series already. So if you remember, we've gone through Isaiah 6 and talked about worship. We've talked about Luke 5, about becoming fishers of people. We talked about curiosity, not really knowing how things grow, but cultivating different environments. And then last week, we talked about golden opportunities. So could you help us unpack what you see Paul doing here as he's waiting in this hub called Athens?
Yeah, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the book of Jonah, where in Jonah, right, if you know the story, Jonah is in this fish. He's running from the Lord on a missionary journey. He gets swallowed up by a fish. He gets spit out on dry land and in Nineveh, and then he goes up into the city and starts preaching the gospel, and everybody gets saved. This reminds me of Jonah not because everybody gets saved, not because even Paul just starts walking the streets preaching the gospel, but because in a similar way, it kind of feels like he just washes up on the shore of Athens here, and he's looking around getting his bearings. And I think it's important for us to understand that in terms of the scope of the book of Acts, Paul is kind of, over the last couple chapters, entered into like the Wild West of the missions experience. The theme of Acts is the gospel getting from Jerusalem to Judea, Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. And we're starting to move into this last section where we're asking, will the gospel penetrate into Roman culture and get all the way to Rome itself, kind of the heart of Babylon? And so this all gets sparked where Paul gets this vision from a Macedonian man in Acts chapter 16 saying, come to help us. Macedonia is northern Greece. And is that northern Greece? Northern Greece?
We can check on that.
Yeah, it's either northern or southern Greece. And so he gets invited in there and he walks into this city. I think it's Thyatira is the first city he goes to. And Paul's MO in terms of sharing the gospel in a city is he always starts with the Jewish synagogue, the Jewish community in that city. But when he gets to Thyatira, there's no Jewish synagogue. This is the Wild West part. Right? There is no community of people gathering in God's name in that city. And so he finds some women who are meeting by a river because they didn't have enough men you need a quorum of men in those days to establish a synagogue. So he goes, finds this community of women. He starts sharing the gospel with them, and he starts to build relationships in that city. As folks start coming to faith, it starts disrupting industry and people start getting angry. He gets beaten. Then he pulls out the I'm a Roman citizen card. They're like, well, we're super sorry, but you should probably leave. So he leaves, and now he's in Athens. And so on one hand, Athens is a little more, not Christian, it's not Christian at all, but a little more like Jewish than Thyatira. There is a synagogue in Athens. He goes and visits. But at the same time, we see that he walks in, and it is kind of like he's in this foreign country where he's looking around and just like perplexed at the idolatry of the city. There's statues everywhere in the marketplace. There's all these philosophers who are debating various worldviews. And so verse 16 there says that Paul, when he enters into Athens, he's greatly distressed because the city is full of idols. And that word distressed is like a word that means irritated, right? Like in 1 Corinthians 13, where it says love is not irritated, right? So it's not it's an angsty feeling, right? The ESV says his spirit was greatly disturbed within him. He's just like, what is this? I don't like this. There's idolatry everywhere. I was thinking about times that I've been able to visit foreign countries where they worship all these different gods, and looking around at these temples and these statues and these gold, like different things. It's like, what is happening here? Paul just had this like overwhelming angst that, man, this is not a Christian place at all.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the Isaiah 6 motif of woe to me, for I am amongst a people of unclean lips. Like there's something burdening him in that original Isaiah passage that we talked about, that he's motivated to see something change, right? He's motivating to go, and then obviously wherever he goes, right? I mean, you can't predict a whole city of people chasing you out, but he ends up in Athens, and that Luke 5 motif of bringing Jesus with you. And then tell us about the marketplace. What's going on at the marketplace?
Yeah, so Athens is a gorgeous city. One of the things it wasn't the largest city in southern Greece at the time. Corinth, I think, was the largest city. He goes there next in chapter 18, but it was and is today. It was a big city. It is a big city. It's much bigger than Corinth today. But what Athens has going for it is really well preserved ruins. So you can actually go there and see what this is like. So I've stood where Paul gave his speech on Mars Hill. I've been up to the Acropolis. I've seen the side of the temple or the side of the mountain that we'll talk about in a moment. And you can look down from Mars Hill and see this agora, this marketplace, where people would come out. This happened in Corinth as well. People would come out at the base of this mountain. They would sell their goods. But one of the things that really is unique about Athens compared to the other cities that we've seen in the book of Acts so far is, I think it says this later, like in verse 22, 24, something like that, that in Athens, they do nothing except for discuss the latest ideas. They're always so interested in like, what's the new philosophy? And so Paul, on one hand, runs his normal play where he goes to synagogues. On the other hand, since the people of Athens, they just love to discuss the latest ideas, he's walking around the marketplace and he's seeing people selling their goods. He's seeing people selling idols. He's getting angsty about that. But then he also sees that all over the place, there's people discussing all the newest, latest philosophical ideas. And so Paul's like, you know what? I don't have to stick in the synagogue. If there's a context to go and discuss the latest religious ideas, maybe I've brought the latest religious idea. And so he goes and starts discussing Christianity with the philosophers and the theologians who would sit around in the marketplace and discuss these very things. And so it gave him an open door to start some conversations.
I think it's an interesting concept to remember, because so often I've even heard in this series people struggling with the idea that they don't really feel like they have a place where they're running into non-believers. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to people who are in that position, are like, man, I'm trying to implement some of the conversations that we've been having in this series, but I just can't find a place where I'm rubbing shoulders with people?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of it. There's rubbing shoulders, like a place where you can rub shoulders with folks who are not Christian people, and also just context where you can have conversations around faith with folks who are not Christian people. And so the rubbing shoulders part, depending on kind of your life, may take some intentionality. I would guess that there actually might already be in place. Like if you got kids at a public school, or even at a Christian school, a private school, or if you've got a work that you go to and there's a workplace, or if you are part of a soccer team or your kids are on a soccer team or whatever the sport may be, there's a chance that there already are non-believing people all around you. And it just doesn't feel like that because you're like, well, we're not talking about religion. We're just watching our kids play basketball or whatever. But part of it is like, okay, well, that does exist. That's there, right? If you're at work, there are people at work who might be far from God. There's people to build relationships with. And so this is kind of what we've talked about in many ways throughout the series is, hey, let's bring our hope with us. Let's be good people. Let's be curious about their lives. And who knows, maybe a spiritual conversation will open up. Maybe it won't, but God can use just the rubbing of shoulders that you have watching your kid play soccer to say, hey, so, where does your kid go to school? Like, where did you grow up? You from the Bay, right? Just getting to know people. You never know what's going to happen, right? You might get a chance to share the faith part of your story. Maybe not. Maybe you're just building relationships. I think the second part is where are there places where faith can naturally be discussed? And, I think it's possible that in the culture that you're in right now, there are opportunities for your faith to be discussed. I was talking to a guy who works in tech, and he said at his organization, there are these things called, I forget what they're called. They're called like, if you're listening, you probably know this if you're in tech, but they're called like support or resource groups or something for employees, like employee resource groups or something, ERGs. And you can start one of these resource groups, almost like when you're at school, you can start a club on your campus. You can start like a resource group for anything. So it could be like a knitting resource group, I would assume, right? I'm making that one up. Or you can start a Christian one, or you can start an interfaith one or whatever you want. And so I talked to a guy who just said, you know what, I got involved in the resource groups at my work, and I started going to this Bible study at lunch with folks from other churches, or I jumped on Zoom and started having these Zoom calls. And it was a great place to discuss my faith with other believers. But at the same time, now I've got this context where people are, hey, what's that thing you did at lunch? I get to share about that. And if they're interested, be like, you can come. You don't have to be a religious person to come to this thing, right? You could start having those conversations. I think in our culture, the biggest place that people come to have religious conversations is church. And I think we do live in a world where there's this freedom of religious worship, and where our church, many churches like our church, have totally open doors for folks who are far from God, and even programs that we develop, like our ice skating rink or our spring fling, fall festival, summer camps, these different places where we can invite people in who aren't religious people to just say, hey, just come and hang out with us. Right? Our cafe space is a big space for that. And so I do think we have an opportunity in our culture, even as we're building relationships on the soccer field or at work or whatever, to invite folks in to kind of take some steps towards church by, like my wife the other day was at I was with her too. We were at the soccer field for our girls' soccer game, and someone was talking about, oh yeah, your church has that big ice skating rink. And Jessica goes, oh yeah, we should do like when it's December, I'll just get tickets for everybody. We can all just do like a team party up there. Like, oh my gosh, you could do that, right? So it's like, we're going to bring all these people to the ice skating rink. Right. We'll give them all neighborhood coffee gift cards, right? And see what happens, right? As people start asking us questions about the church, about faith, right? We have these opportunities to invite them into spaces where faith can be organically discussed. And so, there are times and places to just jump right in and just ask someone, hey, do you go to church around here? Or, hey, do you have a religious background, as you build relationships with them? For the purpose of this series, we've been talking about just looking for all the ways in life it can happen organically. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, as you ask curiosity questions and you're building rapport with people that you're building relationship with, if you don't have opportunities to say, hey, so like, do you have a faith background? Just as part of your curiosity, and let them talk about their faith. And who knows, right? As you are curious about others, like we talked about last week, people start to be curious about you as well.
Yeah. I so wish I could have been in that marketplace with Paul to see what he was talking about, to see, what kind of questions he was asking, because he does get a golden opportunity. He gets an amazing opportunity where it says in verse 18, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. And some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. Parentheses. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. What a golden opportunity to have somebody grab you and take you to this place called the Areopagus to figure out, like, may we know what you're talking about? I want to know what this is all about. So before we get into what Paul actually says, I think it might be helpful to set the scene of the audience here. So the Epicureans get mentioned, the Stoics get mentioned, and Areopagus gets mentioned. So there's a lot of context keys here that might be important to the upcoming conversation that we're about to have. So help us step into Paul's world here. Help us step into Paul's golden opportunity. Who are we dealing with? What's going on in the situation that he's about to address?
And what makes the opportunity golden is, I mean, you see that in this kind of dichotomy that happens down in the marketplace, the agora, where some people are like, this guy's a babbler. What's he trying to say? Like, we don't even understand these words, right? He's preaching a new religion. He's talking about Jesus, talking about the resurrection. He's talking about God's plan. And they're like, I don't understand any of this, right? Like, this is new. It's confusing. But then that other person who's like, no, he's advocating foreign gods. The thing that's the golden opportunity about that is it's like this light bulb of like, there's a category for this. Like, there's a place in our society where when you have a new foreign god, you can come and bring it to us, and we'd love to hear about it, because they did nothing but discuss the latest ideas. And so somebody heard Paul talking and didn't merely think, I don't understand what you're talking about, this is new teaching, but said, you know what, there's actually a place where you should actually grab a microphone, because we have a place in our society where people get to pitch gods. It's like I mean, this is like the Silicon Valley of their day. This is like you go to like it's a Y Combinator or a venture capital pitch or something, where you're like, you're going out and you got to pitch the gods to all the who's who of society. And so above the agora, so the agora is down like at the base of the Acropolis, which is the big mountain.
Agora marketplace, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So the agora, the marketplace, is at the bottom of the hill. Then there's a big old hill, and on the top of it is the Acropolis. Acro, like acrobatics, means up high. Polis is like the city, the highest point of the city. And on the Acropolis is built this giant temple to, is it Athena in Athens? Athena. And you've probably seen it. If you just Google Acropolis, it's still there. The ruins are still there. You can go visit it. And so right, kind of at, like if you climb Half Dome, you get to go up all this, you go on the hike and then you make it to like the base, then you get to the lower dome. The lower dome of the Acropolis is a place called the Areopagus, or Mars Hill. And it's this flat spot on the rock, and you can look down to your left and you can see the agora below you, the marketplace below you, like Yosemite Valley. You can look up towards like the Half Dome, towards the Acropolis, and see the temple. And on the side of the hill coming down towards Mars Hill, as you're going towards the Areopagus, where Paul was invited, there were, in those days, they're not anymore, there were temples everywhere. And so what would happen would be someone would come in and say, I've got this new god. Athena is the god of Athens. I've got this new god named, I don't know, Job or something. And should have made it not a Bible name, but I got this new god named Job. And they're like, well, let's come. If this God is legit, like as we can sense, then we would give you an opportunity to purchase some real estate on the side of this mountain, and you can erect a temple to Job right here on this mountain. And so this will become one of the pantheon, the gods of Athens, and you can have your name in lights, right? Like a Hollywood star or something. And so Paul's invited into this space. And so the people who are there, right, Epicureans and Stoics are philosophers of that day. The Areopagus is kind of a council of people who would meet at Mars Hill, and they would kind of discuss the validity of the claims. And so Paul is really kind of making a venture capitalist pitch, like, I want to tell you about this God named Jesus. And what he's supposed to do is say, I want to tell you about this new God. His name is Jesus, and he is a God, and he's worthy to be respected. And so you should give me the opportunity to buy some money on the side of your hill so I can make a temple for Jesus so he can live here in Athens some of his time, like have his vacation home in Athens or something. That's not where Paul goes with his speech, but that's where Paul was supposed to go with his speech, according to the Areopagus and the philosophers who were listening in.
I did a little deep dive in the Epicurean and Stoic. What is their philosophies? Because I was interested. Okay, if Paul is speaking to this crowd of people and he knows that these are in the crowd, what do they believe? Well, Epicureans, it says, were known for their pursuit of happiness and contentment through detachment from social competition and denial of divine interference in human affairs. So they believed in gods, but the gods really took no interest in the events of everyday life. And then the Stoics, on the other hand, believed that the human race was one. They proceeded from a single point of origin, and their goal was to live in harmony with the natural order, kind of like this pantheistic idea of gods, although we are really in control a lot more than I think the Epicureans. So there's just a lot of interesting debates going on around this idea. And so here we have this setting where all these different people are presumably gathered here. We have, in the Areopagus, was there like a council there? Was there like people that are important?
I'm trying
like,
to remember. I kind of feel like the Areopagus is the council, but I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know who it's comprised of.
So we got some really important people making these decisions on who gets to go up that hill.
And I don't know how you get to become one of those people who makes those decisions.
Ooh, that might be an interesting question.
Yep.
So Paul gets this amazing opportunity. And like you said, you would expect him to go to certain places that we've heard in church services and all that. But it's just so interesting where he goes. And so we're going to spend some time breaking down almost line by line what he's saying. It says in verse 22, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." So one of the things that stood out to me in your message was it begins with a point of compassion. And so you talked about how originally he was greatly distressed, and now he's saying that you are very religious. I see that in every way. What do you think the tone is of this? Because there's been a lot of debate around, okay, is this like a sarcastic accusation? Like, man, you guys are very religious. And then he leads with another line. Or, is he trying to butter them up to like lead them to something? Where do you see the compassion in maybe this first line? Like, I see that in every way you are very religious.
Yeah, we don't know what his tone was, obviously.
Right.
I don't feel like he's being sarcastic, because it doesn't feel like through his words he's trying to alienate these people. It seems like he's trying to like get them to nod along with him. Like he spends other time semantically kind of weaving together. Like, hey, here's where what I believe kind of aligns with what you believe. And so like if he starts off by being like, you guys are crazy, right? I don't think that serves his purposes. So if this speech is good, which I feel like it is good, he's not starting out by shooting himself in the foot by making fun of his audience. Most likely it's somewhere on the spectrum between absolute compassion and like charitable compassion, right? So like either Paul is like so distressed because the city's full of idols. These people are all going to hell. He's like feeling this judgment in his heart. And it's like, you know what? No, this is why I'm here. Like these people are lost, right? God put them in this place. It's not their fault. They didn't grow up in Israel and they didn't hear about the God of the Bible, but now it's time for them to hear. And so like, this is my mission. I need to share with them, right? So it could be absolute compassion. It could be charitable compassion where it's like, hey, you know what? Like, he says in the speech, like God kind of gave you a break for the last several thousand years, but now it's time to repent. Like he could be just saying, you know what? Like on one hand, you're very religious. On the other hand, like it's the wrong religion, right? And so it could be at one hand, other hand, it could just be like a place of compassion. It's somewhere in there, I would guess, on the spectrum.
And I'm thinking of even just regular conversations that you have, and like when you're about to make a correction with somebody, it's sometimes important to lean in with like, hey, this is the positive side. This is what we can get behind. And so I almost sense it as like an affirming compassion almost, where it's like, hey, I see that in every way you're religious. And I love that. I love that this place is talking about this stuff. I love that we're interested. And, later he's going to go on and talk about how we've been almost created to seek God and reach him and find him.
And that's one thing. As I was preparing the sermon, I spent some time just for fun, kind of writing out just what that could look like in today's climate. And I gave a glimpse of some of that in the sermon, but I wrote these longer versions for myself that, which is okay. If I'm in the office and we're talking about tolerance, and then the conversation turns to me and says like, hey, Danny, like you're a Christian. Christians aren't tolerant people. How does this whole tolerance thing in our society overlap with your faith? I would probably start similar to Paul to just say, hey, you know what? Like, honestly, like I'm thankful for the tolerance in this circle. Like I hear what you're saying, that everyone has their own worldview. Everyone else has their own lived experiences. And so thank you for honestly just being willing to allow me to share mine, right? Just kind of, so part of it's like, it's a two-edged sword. Right. I'm ingratiating myself to them. At the same time, I'm holding them to their own parameters. Just say like, hey, listen, like don't shoot down my lived experience. Like, so like in my mind, yeah, Jesus Christ is the only way, but in your worldview, it's at least one way. So like, you have to let me share if you're going to be consistent with your tolerance talk, Yeah. And so I do feel like, it could be either way. Just, I wouldn't be able to say that wholeheartedly because the way they define tolerance is one that I think is actually problematic. And I mean, this conversation that I would end up having with them would show that they don't actually have tolerance because they don't tolerate like exclusive faith claims. Right. But I think it's a good starting point to just say like, hey, since we've been talking about tolerance, thank you for tolerating me. Like I've got my own lived experiences. I grew up in a faith tradition, or I found it. And like, I'd love to share with you a little bit about what I've discovered along the way. And I'd start there like Paul, and then I would have to kind of get to a place of like, and yet this is the only way, like Paul does too.
But you can imagine a conversation where it just immediately jumps to, you guys are intolerant.
Yeah, exactly. Tolerance. Are you serious? Tolerance is stupid. It's, and that's where I feel like I love the progression from irritation to compassion, because I've heard that more than the other. Like, I've heard where it's like people in the workplace are talking about tolerance, and they ask the Christian, what do you think about tolerance? And they're like, I think it's stupid. I think it's just this left wing, they start going on some weird political rant where it's like, they just gave you an opportunity to share about your faith. Stop talking about your politics, talk about your faith, right? Say like, hey, like, right? Ingratiate yourself to them and start a pathway to show them why, A, through the lens of tolerance, you have your own worldview that you're allowed to have, but B, it actually is the one through which all other worldviews are seen, And so, I feel like when people just stick with irritation, they end up they get an opportunity and they just push everyone away. Like, I have never heard a story of someone like, oh yeah, and then he like made fun of us because we were like different politically than them, and we came to faith in Jesus, or we changed our political viewpoint or anything. It's like, learn how to do what Paul did, which is like build relationships even as you're sharing something that's going to be pretty divisive.
Yeah, and as I think part of the theme of this series has been relational, organic. And again, I think one way to do that is to look for the humanity in the other person. And so as you're looking to introduce your voice into the conversation, it's always looking for, all right, what does my conversation partner have in common with me? Like, starting with that, and then beginning to gently correct some of the misconceptions. And so we start with this beautiful like sentiment. I see that in every way you are very religious, this affirming sense of the people of Athens are getting there somewhere. And then it says, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So there's the inscription, to an unknown God, a very fascinating find by Paul, an object of worship. The second part that you had mentioned is that it's custom crafted. And I was thinking, okay, in these situations, I might be tempted to say, I see that in every way you are very religious. I have something in my pocket. Let me pull this out and share with you my religion.
Yeah.
But he really does the hard work of doing his homework on the culture. And so you might be thinking out there, why haven't we talked about gospel tracts at this point? Because it might be really easy to pull out, steps of peace, the 4 spiritual laws, all these different gospel tracts that have existed and served the church really well. Why do you think it's important to do the hard work of engaging the culture where they're at? Because obviously he's walking around, he's looking at, all right, what could be a really good talking point?
Yeah, I think if you take a step back from this presentation, you can ask, okay, what is he trying to accomplish here? And so I think we have to assume that Paul is very good at evangelism. Like, he's one of the best in the history of the world. And yet it's fascinating to me that when you look at kind of the speech from a 10,000 foot view, he doesn't really, it's not merely that he doesn't use a tract. He doesn't share the gospel in the way that he defines it in his letters. Right? He talks about how God's going to judge the world by the man he appointed. He proved it by raising Jesus from the dead. He touches on the resurrection. But for Paul, like, if you look at his epistles, some of his, when he talks about what the gospel is, he really talks kind of like the smallest core of the gospel is that Christ died, he was buried, and he rose again on the third day. He doesn't talk about the death of Jesus. He doesn't talk about the burial of Jesus. He doesn't talk about the ascension of Jesus. He talks about the incarnation and the resurrection. And so from that, we either have to say that, okay, well, you know what? Paul's like, I messed that one up. Or Paul has a different purpose in this message than trying to lead everyone to Christ in that moment. And so I think part of that is, it seems like he asked himself the question, okay, what is going to be my purpose by standing up in this place? It's like, is it to just share with them the Christian gospel? Apparently not, because he didn't share all the components of the Christian gospel. Is it to get some real estate on Mars Hill? Apparently not, because he kind of goes after that. Like, this excludes himself from that opportunity. We don't know what his motive was, but we see as the result is that some people are like, this guy's crazy. Other people said, I want to talk to this guy more about this. And then he does, and he leads them to faith offline, and they end up becoming disciples. That's kind of how the passage ends. And so it feels like Paul has kind of defined the space, right? The boxing ring that he's going to spar in here. And he seems to have determined, I'm going to get up there. I'm going to ingratiate myself to the audience. I'm going to find a way to make a link from their worldview to mine. And then I'm going to share what I can about how our Christian worldview overlaps with theirs and where there are points of alignment, where there are points of, disalignment. And then I'm going to share something hard with them that at the end of the day, this is the God. This is not one of the gods that'll be on the pantheon. Or part of the pantheon. This is the God above all other gods. And someday we're all going to stand before this God. So if you want to talk about him, I'll be over there,
Yeah.
And so like if in this trajectory, they just didn't have the printing press, there are no tracks, but in this trajectory, if there was tracks, I would assume Paul would have them in his pocket. And when people came to talk to him afterwards, he'd be like, hey, yeah, I'm happy to share with you kind of the concrete aspects of the Christian gospel. And maybe he would utilize some sort of tool at that point, but it doesn't feel like this is him trying to like throw it all out there. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the things we've been talking about in the series is just to kind of scope, like, what's the purpose of this conversation? It's like, if you're asking somebody, hey, do you go around church around here? Like, no, actually, I've never gone to church. Like, how about you? Do you go to church? You'd be like, well, actually, let me tell you a little bit about Jesus Christ. He died. It's like, whoa.
It would miss the point.
Yeah, it's like, what is the purpose of this conversation? It's to build some rapport, have some connection, try to push it a little bit, kind of see if God opens more doors, and maybe they'll think I'm crazy. Maybe they want to talk more about this now or later, And so Paul does a good job of kind of scoping the purpose of this conversation.
Yeah.
So that's, where he doesn't share the content of kind of an encapsulated Romans road or one of those things in this message.
Yeah, I think it's so advantageous to think, all right, if he would have gone that direction, it would have felt very confusing. Like he would have been seen as a babbler. But if he goes this direction, at least he creates some intrigue. He puts that stone in the shoe. That was a phrase that Austin Payne used. And now they're thinking like, okay, what is this idea that you're saying?
I love that because you imagine you walk away from that thing like, this guy's crazy.
Right.
It's like there's one God who's above all other gods, and all these gods are just constructs, and there's actually just one God who rules the entire world.
Get that guy out of here.
You're like, yeah, but then you're like, so what if he's right though? Like, I never even thought about that. Like, and so the stone in the shoe part seems like part of his purpose.
So he's identified this altar with the inscription to an unknown God, and then things get hot. The heat gets turned up on this conversation because he says, so you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. So it seems like the logic goes, I see that you're religious in every way. There's this inscription to an unknown God, and by you having an inscription to an unknown God, you are essentially claiming that you are ignorant to the spiritual realm. You are accounting for the possibility of gods that you don't even know, which is an admission that you don't know. So you are ignorant. You are ignorant to the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. This is hard. Like, you are ignorant.
I have a hard time with that because I'm not sure if what that word meant in that context to those people, right? So it's, I think of like Stephen in his speech in Acts 7, right? He's like, he shares his gospel and kind of his secret like underground motif is that you guys always resist the Holy Spirit. And so then he gets to, he's like, you stiff-necked and rebellious people, you always resist the Holy Spirit. God has made this Jesus that you crucified, Lord in Christ. It's like, whoa, that's intense.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the intense moment. I think there is an intense moment that comes later, but it feels like he is trying to, like, you have to realize too that he's in the marketplace, the Agora, and he sees this statue and it says, to the unknown God. And he's like, what is this place? They have gods for everything. They even worship gods they don't even know about. And then he gets invited to Marseille's like, dude, I'm going to talk about the God they don't know about. Like there's because what they believe is there's at least one God out there that they don't know who he is yet, but they want to worship him. And so it's enough to erect a statue. And it also sets like kind of the core values of society that like we're open to new ideas. And so it's like, hey, like if he gets up and says, you guys believe that there's gods that you don't know about, right? You're ignorant of some of the gods out there. I'm just here to tell you about that God. It feels like he's kind of crafting this space of like, so I'm about to give you a speech to tell you about a God that you don't know about yet. And you admit there are gods you don't know about yet. And I'm going to tell him his name is Jesus, right? And so I'm not sure if that's controversial or if that's still part of his like rapport building, like the opposite of controversial.
Interesting. Okay.
I didn't look up the word ignorant to see if it'd be like a slang word or if it's just like you don't like like knowledge, gnosis, ignorant is like a lack of knowledge.
Right.
So it's like, hey, you have a lack of knowledge. It's like they loved nothing more than gaining new knowledge. So it could be like they might be like, yes, tell us about this unknown God.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So it seems like he's even beginning to explain like where he's going to go. So he's affirmed them.
And I will say too, when you read the scriptures and you hear people give speeches that are controversial, oftentimes, I think including this time, the author of the epistle, like Luke, who wrote Acts, or the letter, he'll say, when they heard about blank, they blank, right? When they heard him talk about the resurrection of the dead, they sneered, or whatever it is, you know? So like, sometimes we do get an indicator of what was the controversial moment. And I don't think we get that with this point yet.
Okay. So we're beginning to step into maybe the cognitive dissonance that's in their worldview, some of the tensions, some of the excitement that you're mentioning of like, oh, we get to hear about the unknown God. And now we get to verse 24 where he begins to inform them of what the biblical worldview is. Beginning with, the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. So it's very interesting. Maybe you might think he might immediately jump to Jesus at this moment, but he begins with God as creator here. Why do you think he takes that step?
Well, I mean, two things. One, I think he takes that step because he's looking around, he sees all these gods, and he understands, like if you took 7th grade world history, right, that the way that the Greek and Roman pantheons would work is that gods had localized assignments based on, right, Athena is the goddess of hearth and home, I believe, right? We got Ares, the god of war in the Roman world, Mars, the god of world in the war in the Greek world, or vice versa. And so they have these localized issues. And so this is a common refrain. Like this is the Jonah story too, where he's like, that's where he goes. Is like, I didn't like make the ocean god mad. Like I made the God mad. And he's like over all the other gods. Like, and he's gonna call us all out. Like we're all doomed because the real God, not just the ocean God, the whole God. It's not just Poseidon that I angered. It's the God of heaven and earth, right? And so I think part of it is he's distancing himself from their worldview. Everything he's done right now has been walked alongside their worldview, and now he's distancing himself, especially when he says, does not live in temples made by human hands. The moment he says that, there's like, I believe, a ticking clock of how much time he has left in this message.
Interesting.
Because, you know, it's like, just imagine you're sitting at work, we're talking about tolerance. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have got my own worldview, and we all believe that, you know, everybody's got their own lived experiences. I have mine too. I'd love to show you mine. I didn't grow up in church, but I started coming to church, and I heard this gospel about Jesus, and then I found out, right, that it's not just Jesus is one of the ways to heaven. He's the only way. Like the Christianity is the only pathway to God. The moment I say that, start the clock, right? They're like, oh, geez, right? And some people, I mean, everyone's probably like, oh, geez, here we go, right? Because they're there to evaluate whether or not Paul is going to be allowed to buy real estate for his God. The first thing Paul says is, I'm not interested in buying any real estate. So it's like, at any moment, the Areopagus can stand up and say, okay, we've heard enough. Obviously, the answer is no. You're not allowed to buy real estate. You don't want that. So let's just amicably part ways here, right? And so the moment he says does not live in temples made by human hands, that's where it's like, you got 20 seconds, you got to get out of here, man. Like they're not listening anymore, you know? And some of them, obviously, he's got to build a pathway that like, if folks are intrigued, they get enough to pique their interest and talk more. But it's like, I'm assuming he knows time's almost up. And he just started.
So we'll go right there because it says the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands.
So he won't fit in your system and he won't buy your real estate.
And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything.
Wait, and this part is like kind of like this intrigue, like, wait, like who, this is interesting, right? It's like it's not just he doesn't fit in your construct, and I think he's actually more self-sufficient and glorious than the gods of this pantheon. So some people might be like, ooh, okay, I'm back, right? I'm listening.
And he ends it with saying, rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. And so if you just zoom out from those texts of scriptures, you see the word everything in there a lot. So the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, essentially everything. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. So it's almost like we have such a small, or the Areopagus at the time, and maybe people today have such a small view of God. that maybe they miss it. Maybe they want to confine it to an idol. Maybe they want to confine it to something that humans built. And that is a very first century thing going on. How would you say that that sentiment, that same sentiment of having such a small view of God, applies to our 21st century in Three Crosses culture in Castro Valley, California?
Yeah, I will say that this is a first century thing. It's also a first century and behind, right? Until Constantine makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, until that point in human history, this has been the worldview, right? There's been, everyone believed that every country has their own god or gods. Some countries believe they have tons of gods, like the Greek pantheon, Roman pantheon. Some countries believe they have one god, right? Like the Marduk or the, those types of things. And so Israel and the Jewish religion was a monotheistic religion. So like our religion has one God, and it was an exclusive religion that would come out when they would combat. It's not just like Baal versus Yahweh, and then Yahweh wins this time, like Stanford versus Cal, and Cal won the last several years.
Okay.
That was just raging. But it's a Baal versus Yahweh, and Yahweh destroys Baal so utterly because he is the God above all other gods. Right. And so when Paul goes into the speech, it's a classic speech that's as old as the Jewish religion. I'm here to let you know that the God of Israel, who is the God that he worships, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is supreme. We are a monotheistic religion, and it's not just this tolerance thing of we have our God, you got your pantheon of gods. Ours is actually above all things and even above you, even though you don't live under his power, under his nation. He is a supreme being. And so I think that's big. And I think in our culture, we live in a different world where most people are either, they would be atheistic or monotheistic, I would guess, in our culture. And so I do think like we would have to kind of think about, well, what is, like what Paul did in the marketplace, what are the places where our culture doesn't understand God the way he is, right? And so it's like, I'll just make something up. But so you're talking with somebody and be like, hey, like we do live in a pretty religious culture, right? I hear people talk about all the time, like, hey, I think God is smiling on me, or I'm really blessed, or right, like we've got all this religious, construct in our world. Like I think part of that is humility. We know that like there's more out there than us. We know that there's something intangible out there. Most people would say they believe in God. A lot of people would even say they believe in Jesus. And yet the Christian religion teaches that God is not merely like a helper that kind of comes into our life and blesses us, but that God is actually the one who oversees all things, that he wants to be intimately involved in every aspect of our lives, right? And this is kind of the conversation that I had that ultimately led me to faith with Steve at Cal Berkeley. I told that story on Sunday, was him really just saying, like, there's something on the throne of your life. If God's just one of the things about your life, like sports, school, band, God, money, that's not the thing, man. He wants to be on the throne, and he wants everything else in your life to fall into place around him. And I think for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about that before, right? And so again, that was a track that he used. I mean, he drew it for me, but a visual that he drew to help me to understand how my view of God based on the culture, which is like, oh, I've added Jesus into my life and it's actually gotten a lot better. It's like, that's actually not Christianity. Christianity is making God the centerpiece of your life. And so I do think it's good to think and know culture, to be able to be charitable. Just say like, hey, you know what? Like, it's not as binary as I'm a Christian, you're not. It's like, I mean, it is, that's true. But in a conversation, you might be sitting with someone. I thought I was a Christian before I came to faith. Like I thought I was, it's like I was Catholic, but I also thought I was Christian. Like, I was neither, but I thought I was. And so if somebody was talking to me and say, well, hey, you're not a believer. I'd be like, well, no, I am. It's like, actually, you're not, because you haven't prayed this prayer. I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, agree to disagree. But if somebody comes to me and says, hey, this guy was really charitable. He listened to me. I said all the wrong answers about what Christianity was. He's like, hey, can I explain to you kind of how I view Christianity? Boom. And the truth is what set me free, not the argument,
Yeah. And one of the phrases that I've heard in studying the culture is moral therapeutic deism.
Yeah.
Right. Where God is there to help you through your problems, but then it's kind of like, get back on your feet and keep going.
Yeah. Which is a great, so deism is this idea, this that God is real but not involved. What's the analogy?
Right, where he like sets something in motion and kind of just lets it spin.
It's like the absentee landlord or the watchmaker who winds it up and then watches it work. Therapeutic means that in our culture we believe he exists to make our lives feel better or make us feel better. And then moral therapeutic is to make us better people. And so moral therapeutic deism is kind of a pretty predominant worldview in our culture. There's like, oh yeah, there's a God. Like, I always pray that he gives me money and makes me happy. And, I think he makes me a better person. Yeah. It's like, okay. But besides that, it's like, it's on me to do it.
Yeah. And then what you even said of just like, hey, he wants to be on the throne of your heart and the throne of everything around you. I think that's so powerful. And it's so scriptural too. So like a lot of you out there have been thinking about when does scripture enter into this conversation? And it just did. Like if you look back at a lot of these verses, you see hints of Genesis 1. You see hints of Isaiah 66. You see hints of even 1 Kings about temple or God not living in temples built by human hands. And so it's just Paul knows his scripture so well that he's able to bring these concepts out in natural conversation. It's not like he's pulling out his Bible and like, all right, look at this passage. Look at that. He's like, let me just tell you what I know. And it's an honest answer, right? It's an honest answer.
And I think what makes it brilliant is that he's obviously put some thought into it. And in those days, they had a lot of time as they traveled between cities to think about things, right?
Right.
Walk around the marketplace, look around like, what in the world is happening here? What would I say if I talked to somebody, right? But one of the things that he does so masterfully is it's almost, I just picture like somebody like trying to roll out like a pie crust or something, like just pushing out that it keeps shrinking, then pushing out, it keeps shrinking. It's like he's pushing the boundaries of their thought and just a little bit where they're like, I don't know if I agree with this guy. And then it comes back and he links back into their worldview again. And so it's like, you're very religious. Like, yeah, he's like, oh, my God does not live in temples made by human hands. He's the God of heaven and earth. They're like, I don't know about this guy. and right when you think he's about to go off the cliff and lose their attention, he brings back in, just like what you guys believe. And he goes back to linking it together again. They're like, wait, actually, we do believe that, right? And so I just see him doing such a great job of like pushing out new truth and then linking it back with the truth they believe. So by the end of it, as he continues to do that, people are like, man, I disagreed with like 60% of what he said because it feels like it adamantly is opposed to our worldview, but he's right. Like everything we've talked about does create a possibility for this to be true, right? It's just like it's just a great speech.
So he moves on to talk about the nations, which is an interesting twist in the conversation here. From one man, he, God, made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history in the boundaries of their lands. And so as he's debunking the Athenian worldview, how does this contribute to the conversation?
Yeah, I think part of that is I don't know if this is true, but there's an implicit question in all of these conversations around faith with like I said before, faith was really bound to the country of origin. And so Christianity was very new in the sense like where the Jewish religion was about like, hey, these are the people of Israel and you can join Israel if you want and become part of our people, but it's a nation religion. Christianity is the first like religion with no national boundaries.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it's, Paul is having to answer a question that might be forming in their minds of like, okay, hold on. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the God of Israel. That's fine, but that's for them, right? So like, this is not a new teaching that we would apply to the pantheon of Greece because this is a different country's God. And so Paul is now bridging the gap from kind of the God of the Old Testament, who's the God that we worship today, but from kind of understanding God from a Jewish framework to now saying, and this is still true in Judaism as well, but really feels like he's dialing in, this God that we're talking about actually gives life to every human. He's not just locally in control of the people of my land. He's in control of you, even though you've never heard of him before.
And I think that's such an interesting thing because it almost seems like the conversation goes from who is God and then how does that affect humans, which you might have heard like, who is God? Who are we? And that's such an easy, helpful thing to think about because I think that's where a lot of worldviews go wrong is who is God and who are we as humans?
Well, and I think he also has he does a brilliant job of setting up later kind of the sticking point of, hey, yeah, this God has actually been wanting your worship for thousands of years. And he created you. He put you in Athens on purpose. he's not far from you. He's never been far from you. And you haven't turned to him yet, but you know what? Like, he's been gracious, long-suffering. He hasn't held you accountable yet. But now it's time to turn in faith to him, And so
Right.
this kind of concept of God is over you and has been for generations, even before this was a Roman Empire, is one that he'll use later to talk about in the past, God overlooked such failures.
Yeah. So he moves on from talking about how the nations have been appointed. From one man, he made all the nations. So it's national in scope. It's global in scope. And then it says, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. So I find this interesting because he's saying, earlier he's talked about the Athenians' search for God, and yet they fell short because they had unknown gods. They didn't quite get there because they were trying to account for their own lack of knowledge. And yet now he's saying, God did this. He appointed different nations so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. Talk about how that then contributes to who we are as humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it paints this picture that this God that Paul is proclaiming is a God that we are ignorant to. We know there are gods that we don't know about in the Athenian culture. This is a God he's talking about we've never heard about. It's kind of interesting to hear, like, he's saying this God supersedes all of our other gods. This God actually placed us in this land, even though we've never heard of him before. And that he did this and lives around, like, built life for us in such a way that we might reach out to him. And so part of this is like, if I'm someone who's like starting to be like, I wonder if he's right. It's like, wait, so this God is right there? Like, I could pray to him too? Like, he's not going to kill me for ignoring him for so long. Like, he's not far from any one of us. And he kind of makes this transition from our God is big above all things, above all this stuff. He's not going to be on your little mountain. Like, he's up there. He's amazing. He's grand. He's overseen all things in all times for all people around the entire world. He has infinite power. And yet, if you reach out, you can have a conversation with him. Like, he is so imminently connected with the human race that he kind of paints this picture of the beauty of our God through the attributes of God. That is like, he is infinite, he is transcendent, but he's also immanent. He's right there. And so he is kind of painting a really holistic picture of Christian like theology proper.
Yeah, which is beautiful. I mean, it's just so beautiful. It's like, God is the God of everything, and yet he wants to have a relationship with you. Like, seek him.
He's right there.
That's such a beautiful message. And the way he's wording it is just like, it's so refreshing. And it's so applicable to the Athenian life. And speaking of applicable to the Athenian life, he cements this whole argument in an awesome way. He says, for in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. So he brings two quotations in here. So can you tell us about these two important quotations, where they're from, what's going on, as Paul lands the plane on this beautiful message of a God that is transcendent over everything, but is immanent?
Yeah, so the first quote is from a famous philosopher. The second is most likely from a famous poem. And so that's what I love, is he comes back into Greek culture and just says, like, hey, this thing that I'm saying is not brand new, in the sense that, like, you've got a philosopher that says that in God we live and move and have our being. This is the God that in him we live and move and have our being. You've got a poem that you all read and ascribe to that says that we are God's offspring. So that's what I'm saying, is that somehow we are created in his image. This is like, he's starting to move into this place that, like, not only is Christianity a viable religion, and not only is it the only religion that makes sense, but it's the only religion that makes sense in your culture. Because that's where he goes, is like, so if we're God's offspring, as we all would agree, right? How is it that God is, like, made of stone? Like, are we offspring of stone? Like, we're offspring of something alive. Like, that's how offspring works. So whatever God you end up worshiping has to be a living entity. And then he starts talking about the incarnation and Jesus coming, where it's like he came and walked among us. And so I think he's he's starting to like really gently poke holes in their, not in their worldview, but poke holes in how their own worldview, the consistency and logic of their worldview, which is something that for folks today that I think are really good at this type of philosophical conversation. I see them do that really masterfully, where it's like, we're talking about tolerance. It's like, but are we really tolerant? Or we talk about like, hey, we all just want to follow our own true selves, but we know there's limits on that, right? And so part of this is like him as philosopher, walking his way deeper into this conversation of saying like, if you really believe what you believe about the world, you need to follow a God who's alive and real. And he doesn't say it this way, but it's like, and maybe some of the other gods are alive and real. I think y'all know they're just rocks and, statues. I'm here to tell you there's a real one, and he's over everything.
Yeah. So before we jump into his therefore statement, because he finally lands with like a therefore statement, this is what I've been getting at this whole thing. What does this say about the way we ought to approach culture as we're looking about sharing the hope that's within you? I'm just thinking of, Paul has gone from this journey of affirming their religious fervor, then addressing the unknown God, and then he just seems like such a student of their culture. How should that encourage us today?
Yeah, I think on one hand, I read through this and I'm like, man, Paul is like a master orator, like public speaker. He's a master philosopher. He's a religious expert. He's a Jewish religious expert and historian. And so he's not all of us. Like, so most of us aren't going to be able to give a speech like this. At the same time, I would guess that most of what he's saying is just from his heart from living in that culture. So I think that was the kind of the backside of that I was thinking as I prepared the sermon for this week was, many of us, especially those of us who've lived in the Bay for a while, 5, 10, 15, 20, 60 years, whatever it is, it's like we live in this world enough to be able to have this actual type of conversations, to be able to just say like, hey, I know here in the Bay we believe this. It's like, do you ever feel like it just doesn't fulfill, right? It's like this is masterful to us because he's talking about Greek philosophy and all these things that we've never studied. Well, he's talking about Greek philosophy to Greek philosophers who lived in Greece during the time of Greek philosophy. So it's like, that would be like talking about like politics in America today based on today's politics, right? And so he is well-versed because that's the world he lives in. It's the water he swims in. So he could be very well prepared. He could be very smart. He is both those things. But he also could just be talking. Like, and this could just be the reason he sounds like so smart, like a Greek philosopher, is because he literally is one. Like he is among the philosophers in Athens, in Greece, in the first century. That's when this happened. So he was able to have a conversation about life with the people who live life in that culture. So I think part of it is like, you don't have to be a Greek philosopher or a student of like human nature. You might just need to be able to have conversations in culture with people who live in the same culture as you about the things that people in our culture believe, including you. So it might not be as hard as it feels.
Okay. Verse 29. He finally lands the plane on some difficult truths. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. This is it. You would think, in verse 29, you would think that, all right, he is talking about how God's offspring, we shouldn't think of the divine being as like gold or silver, an image made by human design and skill. I would almost anticipate him to say, but let me tell you the true image of God. Like the true image of God is his son that was born to a Virgin Mary. And then he lived this perfect life that we could never live. And Hebrews, which probably wasn't written at the time, talks about him being the true radiance of God, like the one that bore God's image. Like that is the positive example, yet he camps out on the negative example, which is very interesting to me. Why does he stop here? Why does he stop there and not continue to talk more explicitly about Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is like the scope of his conversation. This is the logical conclusion is, one of the questions I remember asking in 7th grade history and that I still don't know completely the answer to is, did the people in Greece believe in the Greek gods? Like, did they really believe that like Athena was actually doing something in there, or was it like superstition, right? Was it like something they taught their kids, but nobody really believes it? Or do they really think like, no, I think Athena's mad at us? And even if that, is it a superstition or is it real, right? So Paul is kind of walking this line of saying like, the God that I'm talking about, guys, he's like real, right? Mm-hmm. He's not like an idol that represents some being that we all kind of like give homage to, even sarcastically. And it's kind of like the secret of like, we don't really know if these things are real, but it's just part of our culture. He's like legitimately real. And if he's legitimately real, and he is the God of heaven and earth, and he's got a plan for our lives and for our world, and it's time to wake up and listen to it, because someday you're going to die, you're going to stand before him, and you're going to have a really critical conversation about like, hey, there was a real God out there. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of feels like where he's going with this is just that point of like this idea he commands everyone everywhere to repent. Mm-hmm. Sounds real like extreme in our culture. Maybe it was real extreme. Command, this is word of the parangelo, is this idea of like to come alongside a message. And repent is really this concept of like turning around, like starting to believe what's true. It's like, it feels like he's saying, if this God is real, he's got a word for us. And the word that he has for us that he's delivering to you is it's time to wake up and believe what is right and stop kind of dabbling in all of this stuff that's like not even real, guys. Like, what are we doing? Like, this is real. So it does kind of feel like that's where he's trying to land this message, is the reality of his God and the transcendence and immanence of his God. And so it's like, if our God is real, and if he is that powerful, and if he did create all of us, and if he is accessible to all of us, he's got a message for us. And it's to stop believing what's wrong and start believing what's right. And so that's his message.
Yeah, I remember the book God Space that we recommended earlier in this series. And one of the things he said that stood out to me, because it's about food. He said sometimes people that are not Christians aren't ready for a full meal. They're ready for an appetizer. They're just hungry for an appetizer. Just give them a little snack. And I love how Paul has just been so narrow focused on what he wants to point out. And he essentially wants to point out and undermine the idea that God is contained with these things that are made by humans. And that seems to be like the confinement of what he's saying, and everything zeroes in on that. And I think it's really important to think about too, of like, what is the problem at hand, or else we can start going into all these different theological truths that just have nothing to do with the conversation at hand. And so what's fascinating about that last part is just the sense of urgency, right? I think we've been talking a lot about like fears going into sharing the hope that's within you. And yet I just see a lot of urgency. He commands all people to repent everywhere. Like, this is what he's saying. How do we live in this tension of developing relationships, doing things organically, playing the long game in a lot of senses, which is what this series has been all about, of taking it maybe slower than what some of you might think out there. And now we finally landed at this place of urgency. How do we live in that tension well?
Yeah, I think part of it is recognizing that the way that Paul shares the gospel and the way that we can kind of replicate that in conversations that are opening people up to spiritual things is coming alongside them and help, just kind of giving them like how you said, appetizer, like some bite size, something to think about, chew on, Mm-hmm. And so it could be anything, right? And I love his angle in this message is really like, God is real, and he wants you to wake up and follow him. It's like, okay, well, that's a good message. You could have a different one, right? It could be like, hey, like you're talking to somebody on the soccer field, like, hey, what do you believe about God and all that? It's like, hey, I believe that God is inviting us into like his work and his kingdom today. It could be anything. I think the tension of it is you want to share a bite-sized chunk for them to think about that's intriguing. But at the same time, what I notice that Paul does that's a little bit more difficult, but I think it's important, is a lot of times when we try to do that in our culture, we end up giving people a bite-sized chunk that they can agree with whether or not they believe in Christianity, right? And so I remember a pastor one time, who's no longer a pastor, said that, Christianity, we preach the gospel because it's true. At the same time, even if people don't believe it and they want to live by it, it's the best way to live. And so he kind of moved into this season where he just started saying like, hey, let me just tell you, the ways of Jesus are the best way to live. It'll make you a better person. It'll make you happier. It's this moral therapeutic deism, right? Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is then people hear that like, oh, well, it's just my truth. Like it helps me become a better person. Like, oh, that's great. Well, like Hinduism helps me become a better person, or yoga helps me become a better person, or, listen to these podcasts help me become a better person. It's like, that's great. That works for you. What Paul does is give a bite-sized chunk that it's like, you can't escape from. Right. And so it's why are you a Christian? Oh, I just feel like God makes me a better person and it works for me. Okay. That's great for you. I'll find my own way. If you say, I came to a point in my life where I realized that God is real. And if God is real, he either wants something from me or has something for me. And as I explored Christianity, I realized it's actually both. That like the God of the universe wants to be in relationship with us, and he powers every second of every day. I can't imagine what my life would be like if I wasn't connected with him. Somebody could be like, oh, good for you. You've got a connection with the God of the universe. But at the end of the day, and they don't. Right. And so they could be like, well, I feel connected to the universe through my yoga. It's like, okay, great. And if they keep talking about it, you'd be like, so tell me what that's like. That's my friend who did the Feast of Purim at Salesforce. This is a story I told on Sunday. He just started asking him questions about the Jewish religion. So, hey, what do you think about God? What do you think about prayer? Do you think God answers your prayers? And there's a lot of like, oh, I don't know, not really. And they're like, well, what about you? He's like, yeah, actually, like, man, God is always responding and my life is always changing. And it's just like, oh, geez, like your religion, you believe it's real. Mine is like part of my tradition. I got to think about that, right? And so, I mean, you get stuck in this spot either like this guy's crazy or he's got something to say, but it's not like, oh, that's good, that works for him, And so that's the tension that I sense.
So you would think that the reason for Paul's call to repent is because God loves you, because Jesus cares for you and he wants the best life for you. I'm just so struck by the final line of his conversation here. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. And this stands out to me for a couple of reasons. One, he doesn't name Jesus. Like he doesn't use the name Jesus anywhere. We haven't seen him anywhere. And yet he highlights that Jesus is the one appointed to judge. He's the man appointed to judge, and that he's been raised from the dead. And now there's judgment coming. It's like, if there's one thing that we are terrified to share, it's that. It's like God is going to judge you if you don't turn. And so how do we approach these difficult conversations, this moment of truth, this golden opportunity we've been given, and now we have some hard truths to share sometimes. This is a hard truth for a lot of people. So give us some encouragement of how to get in there.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about how he closes it is it's like this wild like twist where it's like, okay, he's been talking about this God that he believes in, who's real big, and he wants us to follow him. Okay. Wait, he raised someone from the dead. Like, who did he raise from the dead? And like, did that happen? Like a literal person? Like, who was this person? Are you saying this person is God? And like, now what category is this? Is this like a new religion, or did you start a cult and you've got some guy named Job or something, right? Who now is like, you claim he raised from the dead, so he's God? Like what? There's so many more questions, right? And I love that he kind of gives this like mic drop moment. I also love it because people were going to walk away saying like, this guy's crazy, or I want to talk to him more about it. But now when they say this guy's crazy, fine. When they say I want to talk to him more about it, the thing they want to talk more about is who is this guy who raised from the dead? So like the next conversation is going to be about Jesus. So that's what I feel like is kind of masterful in how he closes, is like, if he didn't end it with this line, he's commands us to repent. He's going to judge the world, and you're accountable. Thank you. Then it's just like, if you want to talk about this, like, okay, well, what do I do to make myself right with this God? And what does he want from me and whatever? But it's like, and he proved the validity of this claim because he raised someone from the dead. He's going to judge the world by that man. It's like, now I have a new question. It's like, who is that guy? And what do you mean by that? And how did he die? Like what, like all my questions now are about Jesus and the gospel. And so I haven't thought through this enough to be like, man, I can really do this in my life. I'm like, this guy's just like brilliant. But I do think it's kind of important. It's like, hey, we always talk about leading people to Christ. I think in conversations around faith, whatever we can do to lead people towards Jesus, that's ultimately where they're going to need to to stand. I do love, we've used this tactic in Christian churches for a long time of like, where would you go if you were to die tonight, right? Like there's an urgency that you might die and stand before God. What are you going to say? How are you going to get into heaven? And that's a way to build urgency. It's interesting when Paul does that, he doesn't say you might die. He's like, Jesus could come back and judge you right now. And I think that's an interesting, thought that like, if you're a person who likes to ask people what they would do if they died tonight, I wonder what would happen if you asked somebody, hey, what would happen if Jesus came back today and you stood before him? So I think there's an even greater urgency in realizing that like, it's not like when I just get old and die, or if I happen to get in a car accident, it's like, I could be doing fine, minding my own business. Like, I'll get my life together later. And then Jesus decides to come back today and it's over, so it's a different type of urgency than I've heard preachers use before.
Yeah. Man, we made it through his speech.
What a speech,
we
man.
made
What
it
a
through
great
his speech.
speech.
And the way I outlined it on our curriculum is, hey, he affirmed the people. He explained their misconceptions about things. He informed them with ideology. He then presented only what matters the most. And then he has a sense of urgency. And if you've been following along, it's the AEIOU strategy.
Whoa!
of Paul. And so the vowels. And sometimes you'll hear yes. Why?
Oh man, I was about to make a joke about the sometimes why. That's great.
Because that's where the passage lands. And notice, like you were saying, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, out of everything he said, it's the resurrection of Jesus.
That's the thing they want to talk about.
It's the resurrection of Jesus, which should be an encouragement. It's like, hey, if we have a resurrected king, like Jesus resurrected from the dead, that should intrigue everybody on this planet.
Well, it's interesting. Like on one hand, I don't think resurrection is not a new concept to us as a culture.
Right.
So if you're like, well, I believe I'm going to go to heaven when I die, people are like, yeah, well, we all think we're going to go to heaven when we die, right? But there it's like, wait, what? You die and it's not the end, right? So that's new. I think for us, though, it is important. Like, as we're having this conversation, hey, so tell me a little bit about your faith. Like, yeah, I just spent a long time kind of just trying to figure out my own life and trying to figure out what was mattered to me. And then at some point, I had this realization that God is real. And if he's real, I should hear what he has to say. And as I started talking to God, he started revealing things about my life that needed to change. And he started transforming everything about me. And so I just can't imagine what my life would be like if I wasn't in constant contact with this God, who doesn't just lead me, but gives me life, right? The foundation of Christian religion is that Jesus rose from the dead to give life to all who believes. And so it's crazy that the living God, Jesus Christ, I can just sit and have a conversation with, and he actually directs me, guides me, changes me implicitly and explicitly as I walk through life. It's bonkers. So it's like you're trying to move towards Jesus, the resurrection life. But it's interesting. I do think Paul was masterful. We're not Paul. It's interesting when you look at the New Testament authors, they have their own different vantage point of how they love to talk about the gospel. So Paul is always like a new type of righteousness. When he talks to the Jewish community, a new type of righteousness has been made known, a justification that comes by faith. Like by faith we are saved. That's his big thing. When you look at Matthew's gospel, it's always the kingdom of God is here. Like the kingdom of God has come. When you look at John's writings, it's always life is in the Son, right? Abundant life comes through Jesus Christ. And so I do think for us, as we grow in this muscle, part of it's like, how's God wired us? Like I know people who love to share their faith with people through the lens of like, man, Jesus helps us activate like a life that's beyond our wildest dreams. I know that people who are like, no, that's not really, I don't like that, right? It's more like, I love sharing about how God has like made me right and has made me pure, made me, great, right? They're all true. And they're all in inroads to get into gospel conversations. But part of it is like, hey, what is the core of like what you are thankful to God that he has done in you, in the world? And kind of becomes like when somebody asks you like, yeah, honestly, I'm just so thankful because, I talk to people who are in recovery, just like, man, I would be dead if I didn't meet God. Like not only did Jesus' resurrection give me life eternally, but literally when God found me, I was at rock bottom and he breathed life into me and he made me into a totally different person. Yeah. I can't imagine. I've never met someone going through recovery and having this kind of success except through faith in Jesus Christ. So it really depends kind of on our own personal story too.
Yeah. And it does feel like a muscle that needs to be flexed as well and trained, because over time you get into the practice of doing this and like your spiritual eyes begin to open up to different conversations and different situations where you start to see all these different things, like start to see the humanity of the person or the people around you. You start to see slight cracks in their worldview that you can potentially ask questions to expose. You can start to see like, oh man, I feel like the scriptures would inform this particular angle at what their worldview is actually longing for. And I feel like the scriptures and Jesus speaks into that directly. And so it's a matter of, getting ingratiated with the scriptures yourself, getting ingratiated with your own relationship with Jesus, and seeing how that begins to communicate to the culture around you. Like it's really just, I don't know, it's not cookie cutter, like you said. I mean, there's all bunch of scenes of people sharing their faith in the book of Acts. I think this one in particular stands out because it is so contextual.
Yeah, and I think, Paul was obviously very practiced. I think part of it is like we don't practice like in a weird way, but like if we get some reps in this stuff, we start realizing like what we like to share.
Yeah.
So it's like somebody asks you, hey, why you're a pastor at a church? That's cool. Like, how do you like that? And I could be like, oh, I love it. Like it gives me like a job that supports my family. It's like, okay, cool. Right. Like I kind of botched that one. Right.
Yeah.
You're a pastor. Why do you like that job? It's like, oh man, it's awesome. I see these people all the time who come into church, right? They're spiritually seeking, or maybe they've never even thought about religion yet. And they end up meeting God and he changes everything about their lives. It's crazy just to see the radical transformation in people's lives every single day. It's unbelievable. I'm like, I like that one better. I'm going to use that one more. They're all true, right? It's like, but what is an answer that, I notice as culture changes, different answers to the same questions make people lean in and be like, wait, what? Like that actually happens? So there's seasons where like people still believe in God. And that was the big thing, was just like people all believe that no one believed in God anymore. It's like, oh yeah, how's your church doing? It's like, it's great, man. We got thousands of people that come up every week. Wait, are you serious? Like that many people worship Jesus? Like, yeah, like we're actually in a season of revival in the Bay. There are millions of us. That's a great, interesting thing to talk about with people, but sometimes they aren't surprised by that. Like, well, of course, everyone's a Christian. So it's the problem with the world. So it's like, I won't use that angle anymore. Talk about transformation. We'll talk about the good that church gets to do. It's amazing to see families get put back together. So part of it's just like God is doing great, true things. So part of it's just like just learning how to share the things that are great and good and true that God is doing.
And so we'll end the podcast with the reaction to Paul's speech here, because some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. So we've gone a long way in this episode. It's probably longer than some of you guys like. But what would be one final encouragement as we start to think and get reps about what we like to share and what we are wanting to share about the hope that's within us? What would be some final tips or recommendations or any pastoral encouragement that you've got out there?
Yeah, the scriptures tell us to have all of our conversations be full of grace, seasoned with salt, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. And I think there's just a stewardship to just make the most of opportunities and leave the results up to God. I think there's part of that is keeping our hands off of, we don't need to preach the whole gospel. We don't need to challenge, like make the results happen that we want. We're just sharing and we're going to see what God does with it. I love that we see that at the end of this, Paul doesn't seem concerned at all that nobody wants him to put real estate on Mars Hill or on he's not invited to join the Areopagus. Instead, someone actually leaves the religious council and becomes a Christian. It's like he's on a different pathway, different career, kind of like the guy I talked about last week who's just like didn't care about promotion, just wanted to serve people at work. Like part of it's just like, I got an opportunity, I'm going to take it. God might use it, he might not. I might not ever know, right? And that's a beautiful thing. So I think make the most of opportunities that come up. Just try something. Don't have to say everything, and just see what happens, and then get better next time. And but honestly, even when you do a real bad job, sometimes God uses that in miraculous ways.
Well, you might think the series ends with this one, but we still have a secret weapon, and it's called the church.
It's called the church.
So
on,
we're going to have
13 and 17.
Yeah, we're going to have a great episode on that. But for now, Pastor Danny, thanks for walking us through this amazing text.
What a great text. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.